Dr. Paitoon, can you put it in presentation model? Yeah, this is good. Okay, well, and then I think some other participants may be still in the process to get in, and then we can get started. And good morning, and then friends in China, and good evening, and then people in North America, or simply good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this special online seminar series on CCUS, a global perspective. And we are prepared, and then about 10 different talks, and then from various aspects, and then to talk about the CCUS technologies. As you know, and we are facing quite serious challenges from the energy security as well as CO2 emissions. So, and we believe CCUS provides an effective approach to gradually translation our demands from fossil fuel to renewable energy while meeting the urgency to reduce CO2 emissions and address climate change. So today, as the first talk, we have, and then the topic, the energy transition to net zero. It will not work without CCUS, from Dr. Malcolm Wilson and Dr. Paitoon. And I will briefly introduce the speaker. For the audience, could you please mute yourself? I will ask all audience to mute yourself. Thank you. So, and I will briefly introduce our speaker. And then Dr. Malcolm Wilson, and then was a member of the Working Group 3 of the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. The scientific team awarded the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize jointly with Al Gore, and for which Malcolm was a leading author on the IPCC special report on carbon dioxide capture and storage. He is a former director of the International Test Center for CO2 Capture, ITC. He was joint winner of the 2006 Natural Science and Engineering Research Council of Canada Synergy Award for his work with ITC. Malcolm played a significant role in the establishment of the PTRC in Regina. He was actively on an ISO committee, which has developed a number of voluntary standards for CO2 capture, transportation, and storage. He was instrumental in the creation of the IEA GHG Weiban Midel CO2 monitoring and storage project, a world-recognized CO2 storage research project, including editing the final report of the phase 1. So Dr. Paitoon is a key international researcher in the area of advanced CO2 capture and separation from industrial gas stream as well as low carbon energy development. He has provided technical advice to governments and industries, national and internationally. He and his team has developed a number of patents, US patents and international patents in the area of advanced carbon capture processes and clean energy technologies. Dr. Paitoon research team won the most prestigious NSERC Synergy Award for innovations from NSERC Canada in 2006. Dr. Paitoon has published extensively in many top journals according to Google Scholar, Dr. Paitoon's citations are over 13,000, which H index of 61 and I-10 index of 223. So with these two distinguished researchers, and then today we are going to focus on, and then why CCUS is so important for our energy transition to renewable energy. Now I will hand the floor to Dr. Wilson to start.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you everybody for participating in this the first of a series of presentations, as Bill indicated. I did notice the three of us, Bill, Paitoon, and myself, all a little vain and putting in pictures of ourselves into the advertising that are a little dated now, as you can see by looking at us on the screen. But before I get started, just one comment. It's hard to believe that it's 15 years since the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the IPCC, and even at the time, as with most Peace Prize awards, it tended to be a little controversial with the number of expectations for other people, organizations being awarded the Peace Prize. But I think that what we've seen over the last few years is a strong indication that it certainly was a good thing to bring the need for carbon capture and storage, the concerns about climate change to the forefront in that fashion. And certainly if we look and see what's happened with Western US and into the western part of Canada, with fires, with droughts, with extreme weather, and so on, we're recognizing the potential for social upheaval, environmental refugees, and so on. And so that makes the energy transition that much more important. However, what our message here is that this transition has to have carbon capture and storage as a significant element as we move forward and over the coming decades. Paitoon? So as we've seen from groups like the International Energy Agency and so on, reaching net zero will be virtually impossible without carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So, aside from anything else, the cost of stranded assets without using CCUS would be enormous to the global economy. Next. So where are we? We're using CCUS as part of the bridge that takes us through to that energy future, whatever that energy future looks like 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now. And think of it as being a bridge, an energy bridge. We're right at the beginning. And as we look out into the distance, out towards the horizon, the vision gets a little blurred, and so we're kind of guessing to some extent what that energy future looks like, but that's the direction we have to head. Paitoon? So where are we? We've seen significant increases in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this shows us that not only is it increasing, but the rate of increase is speeding up as we move along. Next. And this is always a nice one to look at in the carbon dioxide concentration. If you could go back one. PT. Going the wrong way here. Okay. So this is the average, the daily average, weekly average, monthly average, etc., of CO2, and you can see the increases in those waves of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as we move through the last couple of years. The peak is generally in May in Hawaii. A couple of points here. Yesterday, the concentration was just over 420 parts per million. If we use the averaging curves, that was about 418 parts per million. This is CO2. This is not the other greenhouse gases. And NOAA has estimated that we're on a carbon dioxide equivalent. We're over 500 parts per million now. So next, please. So why do we need carbon capture? We, of course, have to protect the environment. And as I said at the beginning, we're seeing changes to the environment. We're seeing more extremes in terms of weather. We're seeing some of the extreme events supercharged by the encroaching climate change. But we need to continue energy security. We cannot live anymore without it. We cannot manage the population of the globe without massive use of energy. So we have these two problem areas to deal with. And not only that, it's going to be very difficult to afford a rapid change to renewable energy, etc. Probably not even possible. Hydrogen economy, electrical economy, whatever, without massive stranding of energy assets. And so to some extent, we have to gradually phase those out over the coming decades. Next. PT. So this is just a quick look at the embedded carbon emissions, if you like, in various forms of electrical generation. Nothing is without CO2 emission. Some of them, of course, are very low. Hydroelectricity, wind onshore, wind offshore, etc. Down at the bottom of this chart, we see the natural gas and coal without any scrubbing. And at the very bottom, we see what can happen with CCUS. And with a 90% capture of the CO2 from those electrical sources, we can bring those down to something approaching renewable energy emissions of CO2. So in terms of what this can do for us, we see how important CCUS is, or CCS is, to the future of energy. Next. And of course, we're proud to look at and see what's happened in Canada. Bill mentioned the Weyburn project, but along with that, we have the first of the coal-fired power stations that has done a conversion and is capturing CO2 with a goal of 90% CO2 capture, and utilizing that CO2 either in enhanced oil recovery or in storage in the Aquastore project in Saskatchewan. This will come back to, but just one of the projects that's underway in Canada. Next. So the emissions impacts, as we look through, these are not just greenhouse gas impacts. There are other impacts as well, which are also important. But here we can see the what happens when we put 90% capture on a coal-fired power plant. Of course, one of the negative impacts is the amount of parasitic load, so reducing the net output of electricity to the grid. But this can be managed. It does have a number of benefits. Of course, the 90% reduction in CO2 emissions, effectively taking sulfur emissions down to zero. Next. And also significantly reducing NOx emissions and particulate emissions, both of which have health effects in the region. So we're also seeing a significant reduction in the amount of wastewater that's produced in this use of CO2 capture. Next. And I do want to point out, and we've spent a considerable amount of effort over the years looking at the safety of putting CO2 into the ground. This is a diagram of the Weyburn area, and we can see the multiple zones of aquithards or aquicludes even on the left-hand side. So any leakage up from the zone, the Midale beds in this case, would have a number of barriers to go through before any of that CO2 could reach the biosphere. There are also sweep zones like the Manville Aquifer you see on the right-hand side, that again, any of that CO2 that is coming up would be swept away into those overlying aquifers. It pretty much goes without saying that nature has done a pretty good job of keeping fluids and gases trapped in the subsurface. But the weak points of all of that are going to be the wells, those red lines that are drilled down into the subsurface. And one of the fortunate things is, of course, the oil industry is very good at dealing with problems with wells and fixing them before leakage can occur. So next. We can see, as we look here at the U of S and up into Canada, very significant areas where we have high quality air locations in the subsurface for the storage of CO2, for the safe storage of CO2. Next. And we're not going to show everything, but you get a sense we're seeing similar distribution of saline aquifers where we can store CO2 in China as with the US, one of the biggest producers of CO2 in the world. Next. And then a global view of where those storage locations are, and a sense of the quality of those storage locations. And again, it is good to look at it and say, boy, we have a lot of potential in Canada and the US, but there is potential globally if we look at the highly suitable, and anticipate that in a number of those possible areas, we're going to find equally good storage locations. Next. So energy security, of course, remains a critical issue, as I said. Next. And so one of the potential is while we're storing CO2 through enhanced oil recovery, which offers us the opportunity to learn a lot about putting CO2 into the subsurface, how safe it is, how does it move, what are the impacts on the subsurface and the sediments, the rocks in the subsurface. At the same time, we can recover considerable amount of oil without having to look for new fields, without having to develop new fields in areas that may be more environmentally unfriendly and potentially give us problems. And again, one of those controversial areas globally, do we drill on the North Slope, et cetera, et cetera. So this offers us an opportunity to use what we've already got and produce more of that oil that we're going to need for that transition, but in a way that reduces CO2 emissions. Next. And as Bill mentioned, the IEA greenhouse gas Weyburn-Midale CO2 monitoring and storage project was one of those attempts following on from Sleipner to be able to look at a major enhanced oil recovery project and understand what happens to the CO2, the safety of the CO2 in that zone in the subsurface. And all of the work we did, the risk assessments and so on, indicated that this is indeed a very safe way of storing CO2. And this is one of the papers we put out in the journal Petroleum that goes through the history of that project and how that project came about and something of what it's telling us. Next. This is a dated slide now, but just to give you an indication of the size, Weyburn itself, about 1.4 billion barrels of original oil in place. And we're looking at, in this case, the estimate is around about an 11%, 12% increase in the original oil in place produced back with the CO2. In fact, in the areas of the field that are being flooded with CO2, the recovery is almost certainly going to be higher than that, because this also includes some of the less amenable portions of the field to CO2 enhanced oil recovery. And we can look at it as roughly 15% of oil recovered with primary production, 15% with water flood, and in some areas of the field, another 15% with CO2 enhanced oil recovery. Next. And this, again, a little bit dated. There are a number of other projects out there now, but looking at the amount of CO2 stored on a net basis during the year. Weyburn is an EOR project, so CO2 is produced back, recaptured, re-injected. Sleipner is a storage project with about 1 million tons a year of CO2 being injected and stored. Insalar is no longer in operation, but a similar type of project for storage as opposed to enhanced oil recovery. Next. So if we look at it on a life cycle basis, if we're producing oil from somewhere like Weyburn with CO2, then by the time that oil goes through a refinery and reaches your car, our estimates for Weyburn was that oil is producing about 70% of the CO2 that would come from the tailpipe if you were using oil on primary production. And with oil sands, we have maybe 100% more. We're producing about half the CO2 that would come from oil sand production. The lower numbers, 1.1, 1.2, would be from oil mining operations, and the 1.5 or so, 1.6 from the steam-assisted gravity drainage operations. And certainly we're looking at the capture of CO2 from those operations to significantly reduce the impact of oil sand development. Next. So why Saskatchewan? Why Canada? Next. As we pointed out, we have some extremely good areas for the storage of CO2, and that goes right up through Alberta in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin and down into the US, particularly the east side of Montana, much of North Dakota, and a little bit down into South Dakota. A bit of an opportunity in the southwest corner of Manitoba in the oil producing area of that province. Next. And this just to show you the historical picture of Weyburn. Field discovered in 1954, really came on production in the mid to late 1950s. We see the production increasing to about 7,000 cubic meters a day on primary. In 1964, water flood was implemented, and the production went up a bit. And then we went into the decline that is so typical of all oil fields. In about 1986, a vertical infill drilling program was undertaken, and that boosted oil production a little bit. In the mid 1990s, the use of horizontal wells to again increase production, to optimize what was going on. And then we see in 2000 the introduction of CO2, and very quickly we see an increase in oil production again. So what we're able to do is, instead of having that field become pretty much abandoned by about 2012, 2014, we see oil production continuing with CO2 injection into the field. And as I say, that allows us an opportunity to have the oil produced that we're going to use anyway from somewhere where we've already developed, we already have the infrastructure, and we can do it in a steadily more environmentally friendly way. Next. So in this really goes back quite a long way. We certainly don't have the history of West Texas with the Sackrock field, but Shell looked at CO2 injection in the late 1980s. And as part of that, aside from drilling in the field and initiating a pilot study of oil recovery in Midale field, we also looked at sources of CO2 that could be available. Not much point having an enhanced oil recovery project if you don't have the materials to inject into that. In this case, it would be compressed CO2 and operating in the field at supercritical conditions. And we started with Paitoon when he joined the university in 1991. We started to work closely with the university and started to build the capacity for research into CO2 capture in particular, and ultimately into CO2 enhanced oil recovery as time went on. Next. And in 1988, we helped fund, the government helped fund a small pilot project at one of our coal-fired stations. And this you can see here. This ran its tests in 1998, was mothballed, and then was reopened under the control of the university and SaskPower to continue doing useful tests with different solvents and different techniques for capturing the CO2 and cleaning the flue gases before they actually get into the amine recovery system. Next. We also managed to find the resources to help develop at the university with a new building, and importantly with pilot space that allowed the university to put in smaller pilots and to increase the number of graduate students that are working in this area. So this was very exciting in the late 1990s to bring this building on and to increase the amount of research work that the university could undertake. Next. And we have another small paper in clean energy, and this gives you a history. You can certainly look this up. It's freely available on the web. This is a free journal and put out through Oxford, University Press, Oxford Academic. Next. So where are we? Large-scale carbon capture projects are starting to be real now. Paitoon and I have been through numerous cycles where we get excited because things are moving towards carbon capture and storage, and then it all fades away. It's our hope that this is a serious cycle, and we're going to see this continue and expand, and we're going to get far more use of CCS into the future. PT, I believe you take over from here.
Dr. Paitoon, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Malcolm. We have Malcolm have opened the history and why we do this together. I have a number of slides, but some part of the real technical one probably I'm gonna skip. But tomorrow actually I have another technical related talk with the University of Waterloo, and if some of you want to go into technical detail, just email me. I will send the link to you. But we will continue the discussion that Malcolm mentioned. The extra clean utility is a major concept, and SaskPower have embarked on this. This is it's about 1 million tons a year of CO2 capture. It's the world first commercial scale, large scale. Okay, and the Paitoon is a 1.5 million tons a year in Texas. CCUS is about a million and a half. They have very little information coming out because it's the hydrogen production, and we have many more. And this is the summary that give out from the Global CCS Institute. As you can see, the red one, the one that built, and the bottom one is kind of not the right number in my picture, because they have to capture CO2 anyway from petrochemical and natural gas, but from the hydrogen up, and you can see not that many, but we have a lot of planning, which is in blue, over the next 10-15 years, which is we think going to be real cycle of the CCUS, because if we serious as society as a whole on climate change issue. Some of you might ask, well, if CCS is so important, how come nobody have done much over the past 20 years? The reason, in my opinion, is the cost. At this point, when you release CO2, doesn't cost you anything, okay? And to capture CO2 and put it underground, it costs 60, 70, 80, or even $100 per ton. Like you can see the number from Bali Dam and Paitoon. Nobody gonna do if you don't see a benefit. But the system is changing, especially in Canada. We have carbon tax. We have 45Q program in the US, and you can see that the number going up to like $80 per ton US. And 2030, we will have $170 per ton carbon tax, which is that will hurt if you don't do anything with the CO2 that you discharge. That is the situation. That's why we do believe that if the tax structure stay as we plan, the government of Canada and US plan, going to be a lot of activity of CCUS. Another reason is that we have to reduce the cost of CO2 capture. As you can see, the first few projects, the cost still relatively high. And you can see this is the number I come from Global CCS Institute again, in the range of $70 to $100 US per ton. What we envision, and a lot of company working on it, as you can see, this is a lot of feasibility study, the planning that we want to bring down to 50 and below, because that is kind of the right number, which is equivalent of 10 cents per liter of gasoline, which is people can take, and in my opinion anyway. We can do a lot more R&D, and we have done more over the past 15 years. When the CCS have activity have gone down, we go back to the lab, we do university research to improve the efficiency, and I will show you some of those data. First, let's see how the post-combustion capture look like for somebody that's relatively new. The process is quite simple. You have a packed column, you have solvent, which is the key element of the process. It kind of like blood in human body. If we don't have blood, we can't survive. The same thing, if we don't have a good solvent in the CO2 capture, the system will not work. We capture the CO2 from the absorber, we strip off the CO2 out in the desorption section, and we compress the pure CO2 and put it underground. As simple as the diagram, but in the real world, things much more complicated. We have to get the right packing. We have to have a right process integration, because we have cooling and heating at the same time. And we have to have a relatively knowledgeable operator. We can't just put one button and let the system run. It will run, but will cost the operator more money. In my experience, we let deal with the diagram look quite simple. How come people don't do it? The magic part of it is I won't bore you into the technical detail, and some of you interested can join me tomorrow at 9:30. What I'm gonna say, like the solvent is the part of the key technology. The solvent can capture CO2 and can thin the resistance in the column, and the column can change behavior dramatically depending on what solvent you plan to use. And this is the real measurement that we did in the lab at the university, and you can see if you use the right solvent, your column will shrink from 2 meters down to 0.2 meters. It's about a factor of 10 times. And we work on a number of solvent packing, process configuration, post-build operation, process control over the past 20 years. This is some of our results. I won't go into detail. We mimic the way people develop the solvent in the 70s and the 80s by Exxon Mobil, when the coal conversion is really popular. We have some pattern on the long chain amine, which have many arms that can capture CO2 more efficiently. And you can I'll PDF this and give to Dr. Bill Zeng if you want to have a record of where those patterns are. And we have some pattern on the process configuration, and you can see the process of CO2 capture. You have cooling, which costs money, and you have the heating at the bottom, which also costs money. But these two things work again each other. If you heat too much into the system, you need a lot more cooling on the top. And the process integration can be quite important. And we have we mimic the process that have done in the past by Daniel, and we modified it. And we have another pattern that came in 2013 on 28 pattern of how we do process integration. And some people, not only us, and some people, some group in Texas, in this one is from MIT, want to use electrochemical processes to regenerate the CO2. They haven't tested in the big scale yet. We also have to work on how to clean the solvent. As you know, the solvent day one, it looked really good. It's day 300. Well, we have some solvent have a big problem, as you can see in many locations around the world, in the gas plant, in the CO2 capture facility, the one in Texas in particular. And we have a new way how to clean up the solvent. Is similar to the dialysis process of our kidney in our body. You have food coming in, we have cholesterol, we have sugar, but we have to clean up in the kidney system and reclaim a kind of kidney equivalent of the CO2 capture process. And we can use the more intelligent way, in my opinion, to do CO2 capture operation. And I won't go into detail. Some of our book have a couple chapters that we outline this. They call post-build operation for knowledge-based system for monitoring and control for CO2 capture. If some of you want more in detail, join me tomorrow at 9:30 in the technical term for the chemical engineering people. But the question here is going to be, well, we have so many elements that we have done in the past. They work well individually. Can they work well together? That is the big question. And in our opinion, at the research team at the University of Regina, we think, yes, we can. And if we can put all those together, improvement of solvent and the column and the post-build operation, we can shrink the column size and the cost substantially. This is how the map should work. Okay, the key element of CO2 capture is the energy. Okay, if we go out to buy, we can build ourselves. I mean, simple fourth-year chemical engineering student can build one, but we're going to pay the big price in terms of energy cost. If we buy from For Daniel MHI, which is off-the-shelf technology now, we can improve a little bit from 3 or 4 gigajoule to 3. Now we want to push this energy efficiency down to 2, which is equivalent to 1 ton of steam per ton of CO2 capture. We don't have the name yet because generation X, Y, Z, which is we want to put down further. Ideally, if we can put down to 1 gigajoule per ton. That's the ideal system that we can have. Well, if we can do this, what will happen in terms of cost then? This is it become interesting in my opinion. This is the data from last year from IEA. If we put all the key element in the game in terms of cost is on the left-hand side. No, the cost of discharge CO2, which is carbon tax basically, and the cost of CO2 capture and storage. If the cost, 45Q is a good example. If we can get $80 US per ton from the 45Q program in the US, and we capture and storage CO2 for $40 per ton, which we want to do, and a number of our industrial partner want to do, and we build one. We're going to show you the picture in a minute. Well, if you can get $80, you invest $40, of course we will do, right? Because you're going to make $40 benefit. Okay, that is the key. Is this time for real for CCUS? And I think so. This is some of the number, some of the new that you can see. This is the big boy in Alberta, okay, CNIL, ConocoPhillips, and all the list there is they want to use CCUS to clean up oil sand operation. One of the company advantage even go further, declare that they want to be a carbon neutral gas producer, which is relatively easier compared with the oil sand by 2025, which is very ambitious in my opinion, and they were doing it. And you can say, well, how are we going to find investment? Well, because it's not going to be cheap. Okay, this is the article by Mark Carney, which is some of you might not know. He used to be the governor of Bank of Canada and the governor of Bank of UK of England, and now he is the advisor of Brookfield private investment, which has about $600 billion to do investment in different envelope, including energy transition. And he have very good articles that yes, we can, if we have objective and we want to solve climate change problem and put energy transition into reality. This is the one of the our industrial partner working real in Alberta. They built first fully integrated natural gas, and they want to clean up all the CO2, put it underground to have zero emission. And this is in northwestern part of Alberta, and they're going to start running that unit in the summer this year, in 6 months from now. Okay, a few key points before I end and open for discussion. Okay, the philosophical question going to be, well, do we stop using fossil fuel completely and put it underground, don't touch it? Is it feasible? In my opinion, in many people's opinion, including IEA, they already have the statement at the beginning of our presentation is practically impossible. And this is the energy profile come from Economist Journal. Okay, coal going to be with us for quite some time. If we don't use here, China are going to use it because they have to use it, and India and many parts of the world. The best way is to help them to clean up the environment while they be able to use the energy. And I can't envision that we can fly the plane like this with renewable 100%. Is it engineeringly impossible? And one more item that I want to leave with you as a young student, many of you, I saw that 129 people joining us today. Sometimes just to do carbon capture and storage alone, we clean up 90%. But we even have potential if we mix the biomass with carbon base. For example, biomethane with natural gas, biomass with coal, and have the tail end of carbon capture and storage to put all the CO2 underground. At that point, we will have a negative carbon emission. To think of it, the more you use energy, the more you take out the CO2 and the carbon out from atmosphere, which is kind of almost counterintuitive, but it's real. We can do the calculation on those. This is the, I don't have to tell you who he is, okay? He tell us that we, you younger generation, our students, probably have to deal with this over the next 10, 20, 30 years from now. And even US and Canada don't talk to each other on many issues, come down to the climate change. They want to work together. As you can see, this is the historic agreement last year that China and US want to work together to solve climate change in COP26. Okay, this is my last slide. Okay, to share with you, the CCS or CCUS have to be key transition into net zero. Otherwise, it's impossible. The transition not going to be easy, going to be long and hard. And people say, oh, we just switch off everything and use sun and wind. It's impossible, especially the climate like Canada. And society as a whole have to be practical, not too ideological, that we have to be practical because we, like Dr. Malcolm Wilson mentioned, we have seen the cycle up and down probably 3-4 times over the past 30 years, okay? Because the left doesn't want to do, doesn't want to use gas and oil anymore, and the right doesn't want to do anything because it costs money, and end up nothing happened. Based on my experience and Dr. Malcolm's experience, very little, something happened, but very little over the past 30 years. But at this point, I think society as a whole is quite serious about climate change, and we have to be practical. And the world, last point is the world have to work together as according to my previous slide. Even the two non-friendly relationship come down to the climate change. China and the US in particular want to work together because once the CO2 release into the air, it go everywhere. It not belong to one particular country to solve. It become all our problem that we have to deal with. Okay, this is our acknowledgement to our sponsor in the past. And if you have one more detailed information, this is we summarize our 30-year working into 45 minutes, and we can't go into all the detail. You can search our Google Scholar or can email us, and we have a lot more information to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Paitoon, for the wonderful talk. And then now, we open for questions, and then audience, if you have questions, you can use the function raise hand, and then you can type your question on the chart so I can read your question. Any questions from the audience?
You have a few hands show up.
Yeah, and then Kelly.
Wonderful.
Yeah, Kelly.
All right, thanks, Dr. Bill, for facilitating this, and I thank Dr. Malcolm and Dr. BT for the wonderful presentation. I think I will just make a few comments. Well, first of all, I'm a research reservoir engineer with Saskatchewan Geological Survey within the Ministry of Energy and Resources. And my comments are not on behalf of the ministry. These are solely personal opinions. So
it's okay. We won't hold you accountable for your question.
All right, thank you. So within the context of this presentation, I think, there are opportunities, for Saskatchewan within a global perspective, especially in the area of CO2 utilization. The province has a history of, fostering innovation in this, area, and particularly regarding the future, I see opportunity for a mutual benefit for both industry and the province in terms of environment and economic benefit. So some of the areas I want to mention and hopefully get some insight from the speakers, on a pathway forward, is in the area of, for example, integrating CCUS, with renewables. Recently the province is looking at, small modular reactors, and these projects take, long lead times, to come to fruition. So if we are thinking long term, especially with the cost of carbon increasing, by 2030, carbon tax will be 170 dollars per ton. So if assuming that the cost of avoiding emissions will increase, this can also be looked at as an opportunity for both the resource sector and the utility sector. So along that line, in terms of, CO2, EOR, and, integrating, say, for example, hydrogen production with nuclear power, what are the opportunities there in terms of collaboration, with the university or your research institute, with the government, and areas where the government, can come in. And lastly, I also think there will be need, to evaluate the economics of CO2 EOR within the different pools based on different, carbon tax, scenarios, especially in mature pools where there's a likelihood to increase oil recovery with incidental storage. So just, I would like your thoughts around, those issues. And sorry for, the lot of comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And then Kelly for the wonderful comments. Maybe Dr. Paitoon, you can.
Well, no, I let Malcolm talk first, and he worked for government for a long time, and he know all this.
Yeah, Dr. Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if we look back, the government has done a lot to encourage these things, whether that's testing in the field, whether that's testing at the university, building pilot plants, etc. More recently, the impetus seems to have disappeared from within government. But if we look across the border, of course, Alberta, through emissions reduction, Alberta is investing a tremendous amount of money into to looking at ways to reduce the amount of CO2 that's pushed up into the atmosphere, capturing that CO2. So quite a variety of technologies that are being developed, and certainly, you know, there is an opportunity. Dr. PT has indicated the work the university is doing with the private sector, etc. That's all good. Governments do need to be involved and playing a significant role, particularly at the research end of things, as we move through from research to demonstration to deployment. So more of that risk has to be passed on to the private sector. That's kind of the traditional way of doing it. In fact, when the International Test Center was going, it was really an excellent model in that government put up the money for the infrastructure, and the private sector paid the operating costs, and then were able to use the results coming out from that research and demonstration. So we have a history there, needs to continue. We certainly need to see governments involved again in infrastructure, and making sure that if we've got the CO2 or can get the CO2, that we can move it around to where it's needed. You know, obviously the best area is in the southeastern part of the province. You know, and we see throughout the Williston Basin good opportunity, but you know, we can't discount the Southwest as providing some opportunity as well. So, but we need the infrastructure to move the CO2 around. I mean, it's kind of like building the railway or building the road system and Highway 1 across the country. We need to be able to move things around, and CO2 is one more of those things that we need to move around. So yeah, lots of opportunity to work together.
Bobby, we need you to help lobby government on our behalf, and I think that I put this slide on to show you that we have really good potential. Alberta have their own tongue line and infrastructure, but southern Saskatchewan in particular, and northern part of US, which is attached to us, this is the very ideal situation to do CCUS, because they have produce electricity, they can clean up. We have a lot of reservoir around, and then this point in Canada we'll have carbon tax. In the US we'll have 45Q program. We have a number of companies actually from Denver come to see us and talk as we speak. 10 years ago, actually, Dr. Malcolm have envisioned that we can have north-south corridor, the Saskatchewan, Montana, North Dakota, that work on the CCUS together. Because as you can see, Wellington Basin doesn't have boundary. It's for both. I mean, US and Canada, and we as a province, and somehow we have to convince our leader and politician to see this is the opportune time for CCUS and harvest our legacy asset. In my opinion, that you can see from our talk, we have worked on this since '88 until now, and this is if the world needs CCUS, and we do believe, yes, the world will need CCUS, we can be in that very good position to do this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then just one more comment, actually, and then Canada, you know, and then we have lots of shale gas. And then those shale gas reservoir actually recovery factor is quite low. And then, and there's also huge opportunity to use CO2 to replace and then methane, and then basically eventually you burn the methane and then you utilize the hydrogen and then put back the CO2. So there's lots of great opportunity, we believe, there. So let's move to the next person, Philip.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to thank Dr. Wilson and Dr. Paitoon for this interesting talk. I enjoy it very much. And I do have like two questions. Like, we talk about CCUS, right? The utilization. I seen some of the ways that you utilize the CO2, but this question is like, is Saskatchewan a good place to develop technology for converting CO2 into other types of chemicals or other types of materials that we can use it in various type of application? I think that's my question. Is that a suitable place? I assume that is, but if that is the case, like, is that, how do you go about doing it? I think that's my question. And the second one is, I think like Dr. Paitoon showed us the figure that, okay, if you could come up with a better solvent for that absorption process, that you can reduce the size of the column and that sort of things. And my question is, like, is it still like amine based type of solution, or you're going to come up with a very different types of solvent so that you can increase the efficiency of that process? I think like those are my two questions. Yeah.
The utilization, the possibility is there, okay, and at this point, if we look at the scale, like we talk about 1 million, 2 million, 5 million tons. At this point, the EOR and storage still the key, in my opinion. But everything helps. Okay, we can use now the next best thing. Now we're talking about cement, like CO2 embedded in cement, because we can permanently store if we build all the road and the building from now on with the cement mixed with CO2. Well, we can store quite a bit. And I have some colleague in China. As you know, China built so many things, right? With concrete and cement, which they use half of the world's cement production. Yeah. They can do a lot of storage that way. The second one in the solvent. The solvent, it depends on, it's not going to be single solvent. It can be amine mix. And as you know, amine is not amine. Amine has about, family of amine can have, I don't know, 600-700 of them. Some of them is solid, some of them is the two-phase, some of them is just standard monoethanol amine. It depends on the application. Okay, if we have a low pressure fuel, like landfill gas, for example, going to be difficult to not using amine. And now, what else can we do to help the ease of energy consumption? We can put catalyst, we can use the different process integration. In not one technology fit all. That's why I show you the list of the technology that those things have to put it together. In not one single solvent will solve all the problem. The answer is not going to be that way.
Okay.
Yeah, for the utilization part, and then Tianjin University, and then I think early this year, they developed technology use CO2 to make a flour. Yeah, and then the paper I think was published in Nature or Science, so I should be and then already in and then so there's a lot of interesting and then way to rethink how we can and then actually China's policy and then is and then two sets and then so from the top and then the government perspective is trying to say how we can and then utilize as much as we can from different perspectives and then believe and then there's lots of research in that respect. So let's move to and then Dr. James Sen.
Oh, everyone, first, thank Dr. Wilson and Dr. Tontiwachwuthikul for this.
Just call me
very-
PT. My last name is too complicated.
Okay, very informative presentation. First, I have a question to Dr. Wilson. So in one slide, you presented say, in a worldwide where CO2 can be or suitable for which area could be suitable for CO2 sequestration. Then my question is, what are the key criteria to determine whether this area or geology formation can be used to capture or sequester CO2? Because my concern is maybe even for cap rock is very tight, but for a very long time, eventually CO2 we get out of the formation, right? So what is my question? What are the criteria? How do you know if this place is suitable for to sequester CO2?
You're of course absolutely right. Ideally, we're looking at a depth of greater than 1 kilometer. That's not 100%. Ideally, we have these aquatards or aquicludes, again, ideally above. So I always use the analog of putting an onion in a Ziploc bag and then another Ziploc bag and another Ziploc bag and another Ziploc bag. It doesn't necessarily prevent everything getting out, but it does a much better job than a single bag or just putting the onion in the refrigerator along with the rest of your food. So you have that kind of environment. I think also one of the discussions we didn't get into for time limitations is that putting CO2 in the ground actually, unlike human structures where over time things deteriorate and so the older a building gets, the more likely you are to run into problems. The longer the CO2 is in the ground, the more nature takes over. So when you inject the CO2, it's more buoyant, it's lighter than the fluids into which you inject it. And it's trying to come up to the surface. Over time, that CO2 will dissolve in the water. Obviously in oil, it dissolves in the oil, but if we're putting it into an aquifer, then that CO2 will dissolve in the water and it actually increases the density of the water. And so we'll tend to get gravity working for us, not against us. To get CO2 moving in the subsurface, we have to have it in a continuous phase through the pores and pore throats. As we quit injecting and we start getting the flow of water back into where we've pushed so consider a piston pushing the water out. As we stop injecting, that will try to come back in again. And what'll happen is at the microscopic level, the CO2 is no longer in a continuous phase. It starts to contract into the pores in the rock. And if it's not in a continuous phase, it won't move. And so again, nature is working with us. And then finally, over long periods of time, and you know, here we're talking tens of thousands of years, we'll get reactions between the CO2 or the carbonic acid and minerals in the rock, and we'll deposit carbonates, which are completely immobile. So what we need to do is we're looking at that period of risk is really sort of the first 100 years or so. And after that, our risk continues to decline with time. And some work by the Norwegians suggested that when you inject the CO2, even if you tried to get it back, you would probably only get about 40% of it back to the surface. So nature's good to us in terms of carbon capture and storage in the subsurface.
Okay, thank you very much. That is a very short explanation now for me to understand much more. Now, next question, I have another question about term for both of you. So now before we talk about global warming, but now we change it to climate changes. So then why do we have to change names? Is that means sometimes we maybe CO2 could make the global temperature lower or than before, or why we want to change the name?
Two reasons for that. One is it was political, and in particular the US pushing to have the name change from global warming to climate change, so it didn't seem as threatening. And so that's the cynical answer. The other answer is that there are actually areas that will cool. So while globally we'll see an increase in temperature if we look on average, if we look at certain areas, and in particular, we can look offshore Newfoundland and potentially with impacts onto Newfoundland and Labrador of actual cooling because of changes to oceanic currents, strength of currents, etc., and more fresh water, cold fresh water coming down from the Arctic as the ice melts off Ellesmere Island, etc. Then we do actually see a limited number of places where cooling will happen. Generally warming. The real answer, of course, as I say, being cynical, is this was a political maneuver to reduce people's concern about what was happening.
Okay, thank you.
You are muted, Dr. Bill.
Thank you so much. And then it's great. And then that's great discussions. And then any other questions from the audience?
Hi, Dr. Zeng. And there is some questions from the Tencent meeting room. Okay. And I will introduce those questions to Dr. Paitoon. And this one is asked by our participants in China. As you know, there are some different types for the CO2 capture nowadays, like the oxy-fuel, post-combustion, or something else like this ones. And they are so curious about which one do you think is the next generation CO2 capture technology that can be introduced from Canada to to China mainland, or the different sites in China. That's their questions, and that's their point. They want to ask you for that. Yeah.
Okay. Let me do this. Oh, in my opinion, it doesn't matter as long as you can capture CO2 cheap enough. Okay, can be any technology. Okay, and you know sometimes people can do paper study here and there. Okay, when they have to build and run and generate CO2 or income from the CO2 capture, that is the ultimate test, in my opinion. Can be any technology, Okay, as long as at this point, and I do believe the number should be around $50 per ton or lower, the lower the better, and especially the country have no carbon tax, and the carbon tax, in my opinion, wait another 5-10 years, going to be worldwide carbon tax. They already in the UN already start talking about carbon border tariff. Basically, like if you produce your goods in the country that have no carbon tax, when you move to different country, you want to export, you have to pay the carbon tax there, unless you consume everything yourself. That is the situation. My answer is if you can capture CO2 at reasonable price, at this point, $50 US per ton or lower, we can use any technology. Okay.
Yeah, and just one comment for that, and then is and then below this depends on and then where our and then the industrial resources is, right? It's a post combustion or it's from the chemical plant. And then in one of our talk, and then in the next few weeks, and then we have a talk from Yanchang Petroleum, and then their current project, and then is CO2 capture from the chemical plants, and then gas chemical plants, and then the cost for that capture, and then later on the presenter is going to share. It's about 120 yuan. And then per ton, so which basically is about $20. So it's and then there's and then lots of factors I think affect, and then technology, and then where is your input, and also and then your output, and the output, and then you have 99% or 95% or you're down to 90%. I think the cost could be and then changing. So from the engineering perspective, and then we can always find the optimized and then approach for this. Any other questions from the Tencent?
That's what we all have in Tencent meeting room, and I think and I will translate them into Chinese and to tell them what's happening here, and they will know how to do maybe for the consultants or the decisions they were made for that. Or I think there's one more question from Tolu. Yeah, and Tolu, and I think you can ask your questions right now.
Yeah, Tolu, can you hear us? Yeah, we have one audience raised his hand. Tolu, T-O-L-U. Yeah, just unmute yourself, and then if you want, also you can have your camera on. Or maybe, and then we cannot hear him.
Well, Dr. Bill, if you can hear, just final a quick
yeah, Tolu,
comment.
can you maybe type your questions, and then so I can ask on your behalf? They said he can't unmute. Yeah, Tolu, please type your question on the chart, and then I can ask on your behalf.
Okay, while he's typing that, within the context of this series, I was just wondering, how long this is going to be like, moving forward. Is it going to be monthly, every other month?
And then Kelech, this is weekly, and then seminar, and then by the end of it, our next talk, and then is going to be February 23rd, 8 a.m. in Saskatchewan, and then I will send an email to everybody. So it's going to be weekly, and then it's going to last about 10 weeks in this area until middle of April.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Bill.
Okay, so and then there's a question for Dr. Paitoon. Can we get the link for your presentation tomorrow?
Yes. Okay.
presentation, your
How
presentation to
how
University of Waterloo.
Okay. Yeah. How about like this, Bill? I send it to you. Okay,
Yeah.
and then you can distribute.
Yeah.
But gonna be more technical and than today.
Okay, Tolu, I think, and then if you're registered, I should have your email address, and then I will send the email, and then to the participants, and also, and then just for everybody to know, we'll record, and then the session later on we are going to share and the recording on various and then videos, and then YouTube or some other platform in China. Okay, and then any other questions? So again, and then maybe someone is grabbing their thoughts, and then our next talk is going to be, and then February 23rd, 8 a.m. Saskatchewan time. And then if you are, and then in China, and then that's going to be February 23rd at 10 p.m. And then I will email you. And then our next speaker is Mr. Tim Dixon, and then the General Manager of IEA GHG. So, and then his topic is CCUS in the global climate theme. So any other questions? Yeah, it seems, and then we don't have any questions. So if, and then there's no further questions, I think we can close this session now. And then thanks everyone for participating this interesting discussion. Yeah, Dr. Paitoon.
No. Just say bye-bye.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. See you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.